Dr. Eleanor Hayes walked through the long metal corridor of the Triumvirate Council's central station. Her footsteps echoed against the cold walls. She could feel the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. This was humanity's first official meeting with the most powerful beings in the known galaxy. Everything depended on what happened in the next few hours. Eleanor had prepared for months. She had studied the Council's laws, their customs, their way of thinking. But nothing could truly prepare her for the moment she stepped into the grand chamber. The room was enormous, carved from dark stone that seemed to absorb light. The walls stretched impossibly high. The air felt heavy and wrong, as if the atmosphere itself had been designed to intimidate visitors. 3 figures sat on elevated platforms before her. These were the Triumvirate Council members. They were not human. Their bodies were made of something that looked like crystal and light mixed together. They did not move like normal beings move. Every gesture was sharp and deliberate, as if they were calculating each movement to maximum effect. Their eyes, if they could be called eyes, were cold and ancient. They had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. They had seen countless species rise and fall. To them, humanity was just the newest arrival in a long line of inferior civilizations. Eleanor bowed respectfully. She had practiced this bow 100 times. She knew it was important to show proper respect. The middle council member made a sound like grinding stones. This was their way of speaking, though Eleanor's translator device converted it into words she could understand. "You are the representative of Earth," the council member said. It was not a question. The primitive species from the outer rim. Eleanor kept her composure. She had expected this kind of greeting. "I am Dr. Eleanor Hayes. I come to represent humanity and to establish peaceful relations between our people and the Triumvirate." The council members seemed to find this amusing. Their crystalline bodies seemed to shimmer with what Eleanor could only interpret as laughter. One of them leaned forward slightly. "Peaceful relations? Your species has not even achieved interstellar travel on your own. You would not exist in this chamber without our assistance. You have nothing to offer us." Eleanor wanted to argue. She wanted to explain all the things humanity could contribute. She wanted to speak about human creativity, human determination, human hope. But she sensed that now was not the time. She needed to listen. She needed to understand what the council wanted. "We would like to learn from you," Eleanor said carefully. "To grow. To become better." The council members exchanged looks. Then the one on the right stood up. It was a clear signal that something was about to happen. Eleanor felt a flutter of worry in her chest, but she pushed it down. She would remain calm. She would remain professional. "You speak well," the council member said, "but words are easy. Any species can produce sounds. What we need to understand is whether humans have the strength to survive in this galaxy. Whether you are worthy of the resources we would need to spend on your civilization. We must test you." Eleanor's translator caught the word test, and something in her mind went quiet. She had read about the council's tests. They were legendary among the species that had already been evaluated. They were not gentle. They were not kind. But Eleanor had come prepared for this. She was a scientist. She understood that proof required experimentation. "I understand," Eleanor said. "I am ready." The council member made a gesture. Mechanical restraints rose from the floor around Eleanor's position. They moved quickly, securing her wrists, her ankles, her torso. Eleanor did not resist. She remained still and calm, though her heart was beginning to beat faster. The restraints were not painful. Not yet. "The human body is soft," the council member observed. "It breaks easily. It has no protective shell or crystalline structure like more advanced species. This is a fundamental weakness." Eleanor wanted to explain that humans were adaptable. That soft bodies could survive in many environments. That humans had conquered every continent on Earth. That evolution had favored flexibility over armor. But she could not speak. Something in the restraints had frozen her mouth. Then the pain began. It started as a low hum, a vibration that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Eleanor's muscles contracted involuntarily. The pain was not like physical injury. It was deeper than that. It felt like it was attacking her nerves, her very cells, her consciousness. Eleanor had been trained in pain management. She had studied meditation. She had pushed her body to its limits in training. None of that mattered now. The council members watched impassively. Around them, through transparent walls, Eleanor could see that thousands of other beings were watching too. Aliens of different shapes and sizes, all observing humanity's first test. All watching to see if humans were strong or weak. All waiting to see if Eleanor would break. Eleanor bit down on her tongue to keep from screaming. Blood filled her mouth. Her body shook. Sweat poured down her face. The pain continued. It did not stop. It did not slow down. It simply continued, minute after minute, relentless and overwhelming. She tried to think of Earth. She tried to think of her family. She tried to think of Thomas, her colleague who waited in another chamber, monitoring her vitals. She tried to hold on to her humanity, to her identity, to anything that made her herself. But the pain was so big, so complete that there was no room for anything else. The pain was everything. Eleanor was nothing but pain. Time lost all meaning. Eleanor did not know if she had been in agony for 5 minutes or 50. Her vision blurred. Her hearing became muffled as if she was underwater. Her body was no longer listening to her mind. It was shutting down piece by piece. And then there was nothing. Eleanor's body went limp in the restraints. Her heart stopped beating. Her lungs stopped drawing breath. The monitors that surrounded her chamber all flatlined at exactly the same moment. Dr. Eleanor Hayes, humanity's first diplomatic representative, was dead. The council members stood and observed the results. They seemed neither surprised nor impressed. To them, it was simply confirmation of what they already knew. Humans were weak. Humans were not worthy. Humans would never matter in a galaxy ruled by the strong. The watching species saw the results too. Some felt relief that it was not their turn. Others felt despair, knowing that if humans fell so easily, their own fates were sealed. The message was clear across the Empire. The Triumvirate Council was supreme, and all others were insignificant. Eleanor Hayes lay dead in the Grand Chamber, and no one expected what would happen next. Dr. Thomas Wright sat in the medical observation chamber, staring at the monitors in front of him. The screens showed Eleanor's vital signs, all of them flat. No heartbeat. No brain activity. No neural response. She was gone. After 12 minutes of the council's test, Eleanor Hayes was dead. Thomas felt something break inside him. Eleanor was more than a colleague. She was a friend. They had trained together for years to reach this moment. They had believed together that humanity could make a difference in this galaxy. And now she was gone, killed by beings who saw her as nothing more than an experiment. Other members of the human delegation stood around the chamber in shock. Some had tears on their faces. Others looked angry. One young woman named Rebecca kept repeating, "They killed her. They actually killed her." No one knew what to say or what to do. They were far from home, deep in alien territory with no power and no protection. Eleanor had been their hope, and now she was dead. The Triumvirate Council's message came through within minutes. It was brief and cold. The test is complete. The human specimen failed to survive standard evaluation procedures. Your species is confirmed as inadequate for advanced civilization status. You may retrieve the body. Thomas did not move immediately. He could not move. His legs felt weak, his mind felt numb. Around him, the other delegates began to gather their things, preparing to claim Eleanor's body and return to Earth with news of their failure and their loss. But Thomas kept watching the monitors. He did not know why. There was nothing left to watch. Eleanor was dead. The tests were all flat. There was no reason to hope. And yet, Thomas could not look away. Minutes passed. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. 15 minutes. Thomas was about to turn away when something made him stop. One of the monitors had changed. It was a small change, barely noticeable. A tiny flutter on the heart rate monitor. Thomas leaned forward. He rubbed his eyes. Was he seeing things? Was his grief playing tricks on his mind? "Rebecca," Thomas called out. "Come here. Look at this." Rebecca came over slowly. She looked at the monitor and frowned. "It is just a glitch in the equipment. The machine is broken." "No," Thomas said, shaking his head. "Look at it. Look at the pattern." They both watched the monitor. Another flutter appeared. Then another. The electrical activity was returning to Eleanor's heart. But that was impossible. The human heart does not restart on its own after this long without oxygen. The brain would be dead. The organs would be dead. There was no medical explanation for what they were seeing. Thomas moved quickly. He accessed the medical chamber where Eleanor's body lay. The other delegates watched as he ran through the corridors. They did not know what he was doing or why he was in such a hurry. But Thomas did not stop to explain. He had to see for himself. When Thomas reached the medical chamber, what he saw made his heart stop. Eleanor's eyes were moving. Her fingers were twitching. The monitors showed her heart rate increasing, growing stronger with each beat. Her body was waking up. And then Eleanor gasped. Her entire body jolted as if electrified by lightning. Her eyes snapped open. She drew in a long, desperate breath, as if she had been holding her breath underwater for years and had finally broken the surface. Her back arched off the medical table. Her hands clenched into fists. Thomas rushed toward her. "Eleanor. Eleanor, can you hear me? You are alive. You came back." Eleanor's eyes were wild and unfocused. She did not seem to understand where she was or what was happening. Her body was still convulsing slightly, as if adjusting to being alive again. Slowly, her breathing began to calm. Her eyes began to focus. She looked at Thomas and recognition slowly returned to her face. "Thomas?" Her voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. What happened? I was dying. I felt everything stopping." "You did die," Thomas said, his voice shaking with emotion and disbelief. "You were dead for 43 minutes. Your heart stopped. Your brain showed no activity. According to every medical measurement we have, you were completely dead." Eleanor tried to sit up. Her body was weak, but she managed to raise herself on her elbows. She looked down at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. "That is not possible. I remember the pain. I remember everything fading away. I remember nothing. And then I woke up." News of Eleanor's resurrection spread through the human delegation like wildfire. Some people refused to believe it. They thought it was a mistake or a trick. But when they saw Eleanor walking through the corridors, talking and breathing and clearly alive, they had to accept the impossible truth. She had returned from death. The Triumvirate Council was notified immediately. There was confusion in their response. The Council had tested thousands of species over thousands of years. They had seen many things. But they had never seen this. They had never seen a being return from death. The Council demanded an immediate explanation. Eleanor was brought before them again, only hours after being pronounced dead. She looked tired and weak, but her eyes were clear and determined. She was no longer afraid. She had already faced death. There was nothing more the Council could do to her that she had not already endured. "What is this?" the Middle Council member demanded. "How is this possible? Humans are biological. They cannot recover from death. The neural pathways are destroyed. There is no recovery." Eleanor stepped forward. She could feel every eye in the chamber watching her. She could feel the disbelief and the confusion coming from the Council members. She could sense the shock spreading through the Empire as the news reached worlds across the galaxy. "You do not understand what you tested," Eleanor said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You see humans as weak because our bodies are soft. You see us as inferior because we are small. But you have forgotten something important. Evolution is not about armor or strength or crystal structures. Evolution is about survival. And humans have survived everything. We have survived ice ages. We have survived plagues. We have survived wars. We have survived extinction events that destroyed every other species on our world." Eleanor paused, letting her words settle. Around her, the vast chamber had gone completely silent. Even the thousands of alien observers had stopped moving. They were all listening to this impossible human who had returned from death. "What you did to me," Eleanor continued, "was not a test of weakness. It was a test of something you do not have. You tested the human refusal to die. You tested the human ability to return, to adapt, to overcome. And I have returned. I have come back. And I am stronger for it." The Council members exchanged glances. For the first time, Thomas saw something in their crystalline forms that looked like uncertainty. Eleanor Hayes, the human they had dismissed as weak, had just rewritten everything they thought they knew about their own universe. The Empire was in chaos. News of Eleanor's resurrection had spread across thousands of worlds faster than anyone could have predicted. Alien species that had lived under the Triumvirate Council's rule for centuries began to whisper. If humans could return from death, what else was possible? What other abilities might exist that the Council did not know about? What other lies had they been told? The Council demanded answers. They wanted Eleanor to submit to scientific examination. They wanted to understand how her resurrection was possible. Eleanor agreed, but on one condition. She insisted that the examination be public. She insisted that it be broadcast across the entire Empire so that every species could witness the truth for themselves. She refused to let the Council hide what was happening. Thomas watched as Eleanor prepared for the second test. She sat in a white chamber, surrounded by medical equipment. Thousands of scientists from different worlds were connected remotely, watching through cameras and sensors. Eleanor was calm. She had already died once. She knew what was coming. "Eleanor, you do not have to do this," Thomas said quietly, taking her hand. "We could refuse. We could demand that the Council release us. We could try to escape." Eleanor shook her head slowly. No, Thomas. This is the only way. If I do not show them again, they will think it was a trick. They will think it was luck or an error. But if I do it again, if I die again and return again, then they will have to believe. They will have to accept that this is real. That this is part of what humans are. But what if something goes wrong? Thomas asked, fear clear in his voice. What if you do not come back this time? Eleanor squeezed his hand gently. Then at least I will know that I tried. At least humanity will know that we did not go quietly into the darkness. We fought. We showed them who we really are. The test began. This time it was worse than before. The council members were not trying to evaluate anymore. They were trying to understand the limits of human resilience. They pushed harder. They pushed longer. The pain that Eleanor experienced was almost incomprehensible. Her body shook and trembled. Her mind screamed in agony. She felt like she was being torn apart from the inside out. But Eleanor did not give up. She did not beg for mercy. She did not cry out in despair. Instead, she held on to a single thought. A thought that carried her through the pain. The thought was simple: I will return. I will come back. I will not stay dead. After 23 minutes of torture, Eleanor's body finally gave way. Her heart stopped. Her brain activity ceased. The monitors flatlined once again. Eleanor Hayes was dead. This time the Empire watched as it happened. Millions of alien beings across thousands of worlds saw a human die. They saw the monitors go flat. They heard the announcement that the human representative was no longer alive. The Triumvirate Council seemed satisfied. They had proven their point. Humans were not special after all. One test was just luck. 2 tests would be the end of the story. Thomas held his breath. He watched the clock. 1 minute passed. 2 minutes. 5 minutes. The other human delegates began to lose hope. Some of them looked away from the monitors. They could not bear to watch anymore. 10 minutes passed. 15 minutes. 20 minutes. And then, at exactly 38 minutes after death, Eleanor gasped back to life. This time there was no doubt. This time, millions of witnesses saw it happen simultaneously. Eleanor's eyes opened. Her body convulsed with the effort of breathing. Her heart began to beat again, stronger and faster than before. She came back to life in front of the entire Empire. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Alien scientists began to argue with each other. Some claimed it was impossible. Others demanded access to Eleanor's body for immediate study. Still others began to question everything they had ever been told. The council tried to maintain control, but they had lost it. The revelation was too big. The truth was too shocking. Eleanor recovered faster this time. Her body seemed to understand what was happening. Within an hour she was sitting up and speaking clearly. She requested an audience with the council and with all the assembled alien scientists across the Empire. When Eleanor appeared before them, she was different. She was no longer a frightened diplomat trying to represent her species. She was a woman who had died twice and returned twice. She was living proof of something that should not exist. She was a walking contradiction to everything the council had taught. I will tell you what is happening, Eleanor said, her voice steady and clear. Humans did not evolve alone on Earth. For millions of years, my species faced constant danger. We faced predators that were faster and stronger than us. We faced environments that wanted to kill us. We faced diseases and famines and wars. Most of our species died. But the ones who survived, they passed something on to the next generation. They passed on resilience. They passed on the ability to overcome. Eleanor paused and looked at the council members. Over time, this ability grew stronger. It became encoded in our DNA. It became part of what we are. When a human experiences extreme trauma, when a human reaches the moment of death, something awakens inside us. Our body does not accept death as final. Our body fights back. Our body returns. An alien scientist from a distant world asked, "Are you saying that all humans have this ability?" "I do not know," Eleanor answered honestly. "I know that I have it. I know that I have died twice and returned twice. But I do not know if every human has this gift or if it is something that only appears in certain individuals under certain conditions. That is why we need to study this together. Not the council studying humans like we are specimens, but all of us together trying to understand this mystery." The revelation continued to spread. Within days, the Triumvirate Council's authority had begun to crack. Subjected species from across the Empire started asking their own questions. If humans possessed this power, what abilities might exist in their own populations? What other secrets had the council kept from them? Eleanor gave interviews. She explained human history. She explained how adversity had shaped her species. She explained that humans saw challenges not as reasons to give up, but as reasons to adapt and grow. Her story inspired hope in worlds that had lived under oppression for centuries. The council tried to silence her, but it was too late. The Empire had seen the impossible. The Empire had seen a human return from death. The Empire had begun to wonder if everything they believed was wrong. And Eleanor Hayes, the diplomat who had come as humanity's representative, had become something far greater. She had become a symbol of hope for every species that had ever been told they were inferior. She had become proof that the strong do not always win. Sometimes the ones who refuse to break are the ones who survive. The Empire was changing. Eleanor could feel it in the way the aliens looked at her when she walked through the corridors. She could see it in the way governments began to communicate with each other differently. The old system, the one where the Triumvirate Council ruled absolutely and all other species obeyed without question, was breaking apart. Within weeks of Eleanor's second resurrection, rebellions began on multiple worlds. Not violent rebellions, at least not at first. Instead, they were rebellions of thought and resistance. Species that had been suppressed for centuries began to speak up. They began to ask questions. They began to demand answers about why they had accepted their lower status for so long. The Triumvirate Council called for emergency meetings. They tried to reassert their authority. But it was too late. They had already lost control of the narrative. Eleanor had shown the Empire that weakness and strength were not what the Council had claimed they were. She had shown that resilience, the ability to endure and return, was perhaps the most powerful force in the galaxy. Eleanor met with Thomas and other members of the human delegation in a secure chamber deep within the Council station. Around them, the Empire was shifting like sand in a windstorm. No one knew what would happen next. "We need to be careful," Rebecca said, concern clear in her voice. "The Council will try to stop us. They will try to regain control. They might even try to kill you, Eleanor. They might try to silence you before you can speak again." Eleanor nodded slowly. She understood the danger. But she also understood something else. She understood that this moment was bigger than her own survival. This moment was about the future of countless species and countless worlds. "We will not hide," Eleanor said firmly. "We will not run. Instead, we will use this opportunity to change things. We will propose a new system. A system based on equality instead of domination. A system where all species have a voice." Thomas looked worried. "The Council will never agree to that. They have too much to lose." "Then we will give them a reason to agree," Eleanor replied. "We will show them that the old way is already dead. We will show them that the only way forward is through change." Eleanor began giving speeches across the Empire. She traveled to different worlds. She spoke to different species. She told them about human history, about how humans had overcome impossible odds. She told them about her own journey, about dying and returning and refusing to stay dead. But most importantly, she told them that they did not have to accept oppression anymore. A species called the Vortians, who had been enslaved for 300 years, began an organized uprising. The Kaldurians, who had been forced into servitude, demanded independence. Even some of the Council's closest allies began to question whether the old system was worth maintaining. The Triumvirate Council was in crisis. They called Eleanor before them once more. This time their tone was different. They were no longer dismissive or arrogant. They were desperate. "You have created chaos," the Middle Council member said, its crystalline form seeming to dim with stress. "Worlds are in disorder. Species that have lived peacefully under our guidance are now rebelling. You have destroyed the balance that kept the Empire stable." Eleanor stood before them without fear. "The balance you speak of was not balance. It was oppression. It was the silence of those who had no choice but to obey. True balance comes when all beings have the right to speak and to be heard." One of the Council members, the one on the left, made a sound like breaking glass. Eleanor's translator interpreted it as something close to frustration or despair. This Council member had always been the most open to new ideas. Eleanor had noticed this during all her interactions with them. "What do you propose?" this Council member asked. "If not the old system, then what?" Eleanor stepped forward. She had prepared for this moment. She had thought about it carefully. "I propose the United Alliance of Civilizations. A system where every species has equal representation. Where decisions are made together, not imposed from above. Where strength is measured not by power to dominate, but by the ability to work together and solve problems as one." The three Council members exchanged looks. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence in the vast chamber felt heavy and important, as if the entire fate of the galaxy was being decided in that quiet space. Finally, the left Council member spoke again. This would require the dissolution of the triumvirate. It would mean the end of our rule. It would mean admitting that we were wrong. Yes, Eleanor said simply. It would mean all of those things. But it would also mean a future where your species continues to matter. Where you can be partners instead of rulers. Where you can learn from other civilizations instead of always teaching them. Is that not worth something? The Middle Council member seemed to consider this. Eleanor could see the calculations happening in its mind. The Council had two choices. They could fight to maintain their power and likely face war across the Empire. Or they could adapt. They could change. They could survive. I will support this proposal, the Left Council member announced. I believe the Council member is right. The future belongs to those who can change. The Middle Council member was silent for a long time. Then it made a sound that Eleanor's translator interpreted as agreement. Only the Right Council member remained opposed, but their dissent was not enough to stop what was coming. Over the next 3 months, the most fundamental political change in galactic history took place. The Triumvirate Council dissolved itself. A new governing body was created, the United Alliance of Civilizations, with representatives from every species in the Empire. Decisions would be made through discussion and debate, not through absolute rule. Not everyone was happy with the change. Some worlds fought against it. Some species preferred the old system where their leaders made all the decisions for them. But most of the galaxy embraced the transformation. Most species welcomed the opportunity to have a voice in their own future. Eleanor was asked to be the first speaker of the Alliance, the position that would guide discussions and help make sure all voices were heard. She accepted, knowing that this responsibility would shape the rest of her life. As the new government was being established, Eleanor stood on a high platform overlooking the great city where the council station was located. Thomas stood beside her. Below them, crowds of different alien species celebrated together. They were celebrating the end of oppression. They were celebrating the beginning of a new era. Do you think it will work? Thomas asked, looking out at the scene below. Eleanor took a deep breath. I do not know, she said honestly. But I know that it is possible. I know that when people refuse to give up, when they refuse to stay broken, when they refuse to accept that their situation is permanent, then change becomes possible. The old system is dying. What comes next is up to all of us. Thomas smiled. He reached over and took Eleanor's hand. Together, they watched as the Empire began its transformation into something new. Eleanor Hayes stood in the communications chamber on Earth. Behind her, through the transparent walls, she could see the planet that had given birth to humanity. The blue oceans. The green continents. The white clouds swirling around the atmosphere. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. For the first time since leaving Earth, she felt like she was truly coming home. Not just to a place but to a moment. A moment where she could finally speak to her own people and tell them what had happened. A moment where she could explain the journey that had taken her from a diplomat to a revolutionary to the first speaker of a new galactic civilization. Thomas stood beside her, making final adjustments to the communication equipment. Around them, other members of the human delegation worked quietly. They had all been transformed by their experiences in the Empire. They had all seen things that would change humanity forever. But Eleanor was the one who would speak first. Eleanor was the one who would tell the story. The signal was ready. Every human on Earth who had access to communication technology would be able to see and hear Eleanor. Billions of people would be watching. Billions of people would be listening. This was the moment that would define humanity's place in the galactic community. Eleanor took a deep breath. She thought about the pain she had endured. She thought about the moment of death. She thought about returning to life and discovering that she was stronger than she had ever imagined. She thought about the journey from despair to hope to transformation. And then she began to speak. My name is Dr. Eleanor Hayes, and I am speaking to you from the heart of the Triumvirate Council's Central Station, which is now the headquarters of the United Alliance of Civilizations. I am speaking to you because humanity has been chosen for something extraordinary. We have been given a responsibility that will shape the future of our species and the future of the entire galaxy. Eleanor paused. She could see the feed showing reactions on Earth. People were listening intently. Some were crying. Some were smiling. All of them were paying attention. I died, Eleanor continued. The council tested me and I died. For 43 minutes, my heart did not beat. My brain showed no activity. By every measure of medical science, I was gone. But then I returned. I came back to life. And when I did, everything changed. She explained what had happened during the second test. She explained how she had returned in 38 minutes. She explained the revelation that had shaken the Empire to its core. She spoke about human evolution, about the millions of years that had shaped humanity into a species that refused to break. But this is not just about me, Eleanor said, her voice growing stronger. This is about all of us. This is about what it means to be human. Throughout our history, humans have faced impossible odds. We have survived ice ages that destroyed most of the life on our planet. We have survived plagues that killed millions. We have survived wars and famine and natural disasters. And through it all, we have never given up. We have always returned. Eleanor looked directly into the camera. She thought about every human who had ever struggled and overcome. She thought about every person who had faced difficulty and refused to surrender. She thought about the strength that lay dormant in the human spirit. The council thought that strength meant the ability to dominate others. They thought that power came from force and control. But they were wrong. The real power, the power that will shape the future, comes from the ability to endure. It comes from the refusal to break. It comes from returning again and again no matter how many times you fall. Eleanor walked across the chamber as she spoke. We have been given a choice as a species. We can use our newfound position in the galactic community to gain power and dominance, just like the council did. We can try to rule over other species. We can try to take what we want. Or we can choose a different path. She stopped and turned back to the camera. I believe we should choose the path of partnership. I believe we should use our resilience, our ability to adapt and survive, not to conquer but to help. To build. To create something better than what came before. To prove that a civilization does not need to rule through fear to be strong. On Earth, people listened. In schools and homes and gathering places, humans watched their representatives speak about their place in the galaxy. They listened as she explained that humanity would not be joining an empire that ruled through domination. Instead, humanity would help build something new. Something based on cooperation and mutual respect. The road ahead will not be easy, Eleanor warned. There will be species that do not trust us. There will be difficulties and misunderstandings. There will be times when we question whether this new system can work. But I have faced death twice and returned twice. I have learned that the impossible can become possible. I have learned that change is always within reach if we have the courage to pursue it. Eleanor's voice became softer, more personal. I know that many of you are wondering what this means for Earth. Will we be safe? Will we be respected? Will we have a voice that matters? The answer to all of these questions is yes. The United Alliance of Civilizations guarantees the rights of all member species. Earth will have representatives in the galactic government. Your voices will be heard. Your needs will matter. She paused and looked at Thomas. He nodded encouragement. Eleanor continued, but with these rights comes responsibility. We must be worthy of the trust that has been placed in us. We must be the kind of civilization that others can rely on. We must prove that humans are not just survivors. We are builders. We are creators. We are partners in creating something beautiful. Eleanor spoke about the practical changes that would come to Earth. Trade agreements with other species. Technology sharing. Educational exchanges. Humans would be able to travel to other worlds. Other species would be able to visit Earth. The isolation that had defined humanity for all of history was about to end. Some of you may be afraid of this change, Eleanor acknowledged. Change is always frightening. But I ask you to remember something. We are the species that survived the Ice Age. We are the species that built civilizations from nothing. We are the species that refuses to stay broken. If we can do all of that, we can certainly learn to live alongside other intelligent beings. Eleanor looked out at the stars visible beyond Earth's atmosphere through the station's windows. The universe is vast and full of wonders we have never imagined. There are worlds out there that we will explore. There are mysteries we will solve together with our new allies. There are challenges we will face as one united civilization. And through it all, humans will be there, contributing our strength, our creativity, our resilience, and our hope. She raised her hand, a simple gesture but one full of meaning. This is not the end of humanity's story. This is the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where we stand not as subjects under rulers, but as equals among the stars. A chapter where our greatest strength, our refusal to break, is no longer something we must hide but something we can share with the galaxy. Eleanor lowered her hand and smiled. We have been given a gift, a second chance, just like I was given a second chance when I returned from death. We must use this gift wisely. We must use it to build a future that honors both our past and our potential. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing in humanity. And thank you for joining us in this new journey. The transmission ended. On Earth, in homes and schools and gathering places across the planet, humans sat in silence for a moment. Then, slowly, a wave of understanding and hope began to spread across the world. Humanity was no longer alone. Humanity was no longer isolated. Humanity was part of something vast and new and full of possibility. Eleanor turned away from the camera and looked at Thomas. They both smiled, knowing that everything had changed. The age of human isolation was over. The age of human partnership had begun. And it all started with one woman who had died and refused to stay dead. It all started with Eleanor Hayes, who had shown the galaxy that the human spirit could not be broken. As Earth celebrated below, Eleanor looked toward the future with quiet determination. The path ahead would not be easy, but humanity would walk it together, united by the knowledge that they were capable of overcoming anything. They were the species that returned. They were the species that refused to break. And now the entire galaxy would learn what that meant.